All right, let's begin. Transformation in close contact industries, software and AI as a service. Let's look at first the close encounters of the COVID kind. These are physical touch points and close proximities are becoming taboo. So with the riskiest activities out there for coronavirus, ranging from low risk to medium risk to high risk, let's look at them all. Whether it's low risk in outdoor dining or getting takeaway food or outdoor exercise and playing tennis, to walking in a busy downtown street or having a vacation at home with another family. These are relatively low risk, but make sure that both families have been taking care, being COVID safe. And also seeing your doctor is relatively low risk, but you got to still take care in the waiting rooms. When it comes to medium risk, this is going to malls, so doing your shopping, going out for getting a haircut, going to the casino, seeing a movie. Really, that's really close proximity with other people in a sort of relatively smaller room, and then eating at a restaurant, so dining in, and watch out for these shared condiments and sharing food with others, and to exercising at a gym and watching, playing basketball or bowling. And the high risk ones. So this includes going to a nightclub or, at a indoor bar, going to a church or at a sports stadium. So all these sort of outdoor entertainment where it involves close proximities, essentially now taboo. And the industries in these areas are all looking to transform their business models to ensure that one, it's contactless, and two, it can be delivered digitally, and three, how do we actually use automation to help streamline these services and deliver remotely. For example, in theaters, right, the old cinema business model is no longer working. I mean, they've been dying for years. It's just COVID essentially making the sort of nail in the coffin, with theaters like AMC essentially trying to hire epidemiologists to say it's COVID safe, but the consumers are just no longer going to the theaters at all. And movies like Tenet, one of the ones directed by Christopher Nolan, who directed Interstellar and Inception, these large-scale movies, has essentially decided to delay the release of this film. And that's in line with what Warner Brothers wants as well. Warner Brothers, obviously, for the profits and number of tickets he can sell at theaters, and Christopher Nolan, putting his foot down to making sure that his artistic vision for the movie can be realized instead of someone's home theater or someone's TV. But what that's really underestimating is that of what people will essentially do right now with all their home theaters and what they're already doing with streaming services. So you can see that AMC and Universal have actually decided to agree to let movies go from theaters to digital rentals much sooner. And this was only a recent announcement. So films will only have to be in theaters for 3 weekends now before going to these digital platforms, whether it's Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu and all the others, and Prime Video, and all the major TV broadcasters has essentially created their own streaming services. And recently, NBC Universal have just developed their Peacock streaming service, and that's got Brave New World, the new TV series, as sort of one of their major projects to launch. And so that's essentially the essential nail in the coffin for physical theaters. We're seeing the streaming services become the go-to for even new movies. Eventually, these 3 weekends will be reduced to 0. So a company called ARK Invest, they're an investment firm that essentially look at disruptive innovation and in listed stocks. So they've put out a research in Big Ideas 2020, and they predict that streaming revenue is essentially going to grow at 35% per year. And in 2019, the market size in the US was $86 billion, and they think it's going to grow to roughly $390 billion by 2024. That's only in the next 4 years. And that's across video streaming. So we talked about with movies and TV shows, to audio streaming as well, whether it's Spotify or Amazon Music or YouTube Music. And there's also game streaming. So all the ones where you watch on Twitch and also on YouTube, but also playing games using their cloud-based services, whether it's through NVIDIA or Google Stadia. And a whole raft of others that will be coming online with Xbox as well as PlayStation. So rather than having your own devices or sort of graphical compute units, you're essentially using the cloud-based servers of those. And as long as you have a good good streaming service, you'll be able to actually play those games based on that cloud computing. And all these will be growing a much faster rate than these 30% figures, because these figures were determined pre-COVID. So we're actually going to see, more like 50% at an annual rate. If you compare it to something like the adoption of Microsoft 365 subscription services, I think that's where the annual rate will be heading. When it comes to food, you can see that everyone's moving towards these contactless delivery services when you're looking at food delivery. These are your local Colombia food delivery services, but in Europe, there's Deliveroo, there's Uber Eats, there's Foodora, including in the US and in Australia. In China, it's Meituan, JD.com, and Easy. And so these ones are always sort of trying to, their businesses have boomed during the COVID eras, but they still have the people in the loop. You can see all these bicycles and all these motorbikes and cars essentially delivering these goods from point A to point B, especially food. And what's that still leaving is that risk of the contact point of people still handling the food. And if you look at how careful they are in hospital wards amid COVID, there's essentially a lot of things you need to be careful of, especially when it involves these spreading of germs and other things. So we're seeing the tech companies tackle this space with autonomous vehicles. There's been an explosion of autonomous vehicles developed in China, whether it's ground-based drones like the one you see here from the likes of Baidu and Tencent and Didi. And also, if you look at things like Amazon's Prime ground-based drones, and also the area drones like the Prime Air, and Google's Project Wing, and Uber's Elevate, which is the actual ride-sharing service for delivering people from point A to point B. And they're also working on the Uber Eats version of the delivery drones. And for people in apartments, this is a huge sort of success for them, because they can no longer have to go down the elevators, which is another contact point and close proximity risk. They can just have these land on their balconies and use GPS to be able to tell where the drones should be going instead. And when it comes to the broader logistics space, there's autonomous vehicles and trucks as well. So this is the US Too Simple self-driving trucks. They're able to deliver these large sort of items across the country on the highways. And it's probably the lowest hanging fruit for autonomous vehicles, given there's not as much sort of different scenarios while driving on the freeways and trucks. And so Google Waymo is doing the same as well. And I think that's getting more success than what their traditional self-driving cars and ride sharing is getting at the moment. So ARK Invest has also looked at these service robots essentially penetrating the logistics space. If you compare these sort of robots in Amazon's fulfillment centers, for example, and looking at over the years how many employees they had relative to the number of robots, the robots proportion has been increasing over time as well. And in 2019, there's actually using over 200,000 robots compared to a total of 650,000 employees. It's almost like 1 to 3. So eventually they're going to have more and more of these robots doing the fulfillment center work and all the deliveries, and the cost of delivery will actually go down from $1.60 per US dollar mile to 6 cents per US dollar mile through autonomous delivery. And what that means is that the cost of it will become essentially negligible, and you'll be able to deliver cheaply over for example, in food. And with food, you can actually also automate the cooking process, right? So this is the ShopRite pilots the salad making robot called salad making robot called Sally, and it's really just a machine where you can throw in lots of fruit and vegetables, and it'll cut it up for you. But that's the basics. If you think about these robotic arms that can essentially mimic all the flipping of burgers and cooking of certain dishes, this is essentially where we're heading. And the former CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, has actually founded a company called Cloud Kitchens. So it's like the Uber for kitchens, and he's creating all these large spaces, essentially these ghost kitchens, where people can come in and cook their food and have that delivered to other people. So you don't need to invest in that upfront capital investment of having a kitchen. You can leverage these cloud kitchens. But what that's doing is also is able to then monitor how the food is being cooked and is eventually automate that process as well, using the technologies that you see here. So robots will cause that shift from unpaid work to paid work. So if you think about the cost of a home cooked meal, right now it has the cost of the food that you pay for, the raw materials, the cost of prepping the food and the cleaning up cost. So that's all time cost relative to the average US citizen. And then there's the grocery time cost as well. So the time to get the groceries in the first place. And it adds up to about $12 per meal per person. And you compare that to a fast casual restaurant where you're just getting it delivered, it's about $12 as well. So we've reached price parity in getting our food delivered to us. But that's depending on what you prefer, whether you think it's healthy or not. And I'm sure we can find ways to, find the origins of the food to make sure it's healthy as well. When you think about the total cost of the food to US consumers, food outside the home is about $930 billion, right? So the potential to increase that market, when you think about all the food that's being done inside the home, it's about a total of $2.4 trillion, right? So that additional sort of $1.4 trillion and the $226 billion in grocery time is the addressable market for this non-market activity of the labor costs that have been cooking at home. So there's a lot of opportunity in these drones and the autonomous cooking bots and all these other opportunities to tackle that addressable market is going to be going off the roof since COVID. What's happening also in the space of driverless delivery is these vans that you're seeing essentially delivering medical supplies in China. This is the Neolix vehicle in Wuhan in February. So they kicked off very early, and this sort of COVID has become this great, gigantic robotic leap for the Chinese robotics companies. There's also the automation initiatives that they're having. They're also doing these drones for medical supply delivery as well. And even the hotels like Marriott and Hilton are using these robots to do these room deliveries because it gives the people the peace of mind that they don't risk themselves getting contaminated. And obviously at hospitals, these robots are training nurses to how to make sure they're staying COVID safe. And at the same time, there's robots that are delivering these medical supplies from different wards within the hospital to ensure that they are COVID safe. And so what we're seeing is that these robots are ensuring a lot of that contactless efforts and mitigating the proximity between people as well. So sizing the opportunity, ARK Invest thinks that the automation could add $800 billion to US GDP over the next 5 years, and then $12 trillion over the next 15 years. So by 2035, this GDP could hit 40 trillion, which is nearly 40 times higher than the case than without automation, which is increasing it at 2.4% growth rate instead of 1.8%. So it's a really need to have to embed automation in your country to ensure that you get the right returns. Ensuring you're getting the right efficiencies and the outputs that you want. And then what happens with all this automation is that it's still being accumulated in these tech companies. So eventually all the shareholders are the ultimate beneficiaries of the wealth that's generated through automation. And so that's why Andrew Yang, who was running for president in the US, was asking for a universal basic income or a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for every citizen over 18 years old. And so what that means is that that's about $12,000 a year unconditionally. So people will be able to get that money so that it essentially becomes a dividend from automation. And that's essentially how you can distribute potentially all the sort of captured value as a result of automation, from what Amazon's doing to all the shopping malls, to what Google's doing to all the internet searches and all the other ad revenue spends from the local newspapers and others, essentially capturing that value in Google. And it's the Google shareholders and the Amazon shareholders that are essentially reaping that reward. And so this dividend will essentially be able to pass that on to the individuals out there as well. And he's trying to introduce a value added tax, which is in Australia, it's called the GST, essentially taking a clip of every Google search, every Amazon sale, and every Facebook like to essentially cover the technology efforts, being the new oil of the 21st century. And so Andrew was essentially saying that he should have been talking about the pandemic instead of automation, because what's happening now is that people are becoming unemployed through no fault of their own. And through his nonprofit now, Humanity Forward, he's actually making this universal basic income more and more mainstream and more popular and more sort of realistic, because people are starting to come around and ask for this all around the country. And also what's happening in the Colombia as well, there's potentially ways of people asking for a universal basic income. And this might be just a global movement of everyone being in lockdowns, unemployed through no fault of their own. And now is actually the way for governments to use this as an opportunity to spend on the stimulus measures and embed that into every individual. Because essentially what individuals that can't pay their bills, that money will go straight into the economy rather than just sitting in the bank account. So being able to distribute that to directly to people's hands, that means that it'll be spent at their local citizens, local communities, and essentially empowering that economy for a trickle-up economy. So how do you actually get this money out to the public if you don't have the infrastructure to have bank accounts for general public? You know, that's what's happening in a lot of developed nations and developing countries, but also in developed nations. So in China, for example, in 2014, as a relative percentage to GDP, this is the blue dots are essentially representing the mobile payments. So about 0.9 trillion, $900 billion. So it's about only $10 trillion of GDP at the time. So it was about 10% of the economy. And then going forward, you can see that in 2019, it's actually grown to 34 trillion, which is double the size of the GDP. So the number of mobile payments essentially representing more than double the entire GDP generated in China. And that's because of the infrastructure they have through Alipay and WeChat Pay, and also the fact that amidst COVID, they actually think that the cash is the most dirtiest form of transaction there can be, because there is risk of COVID being spread through these notes that's been passed on from individual to individual, and it just continues on throughout the economy. So that's why China is essentially looking to issue their own digital currency and also have the ability to trace through how money has been spent throughout the economy. So this central bank digital currency concept is being looked at all around the world. Essentially, it's been accelerated due to Facebook's Libra, right? So the Facebook proposed the digital currency that'll be run by the Libra Foundation, where Facebook is a partner across all the other partners. But basically this digital currency will enable you to track and trace how every dollar is spent, from the Reserve Bank issuing it to then the local banks, and then to all the individual retailers and individual citizens throughout the economy. You know, this sounds creepy, but the data generated, they think, is will sort of inform them to how to better run monetary policy as well as fiscal stimulus measures. In the US, the ARK Invest team are looking to see that by 2024, there'll be over 220 million digital wallet users over the next 4 years. So, and valuing each of those users at about $3,500 in terms of the lifetime value of each customer. But it means it's an $800 billion opportunity to do these digital wallets. And so definitely an industry to watch out for. In the US, it's been very popular, for example, by Square's Cash App. So this is run by Jack Dorsey, who runs also Twitter, and also Venmo and PayPal. So there's a digital payments infrastructure, and the business that they're getting as a result of COVID is accelerated quite a lot as a result. And you have your local Colombian sort of payment systems as well. And these are the opportunities that these companies could be moving into. So yeah, again, that size of the opportunity, $800 billion by 2024. So it's about a 27% annual rate. And over the next 4 years, we're seeing that sort of growth, which is a 27 times the size of the $30 billion today. So let's move on to number 2, remote working, learning, and automating for contactless self-sufficiency. How we can accelerate technology abundance using AI and software as a service. We're all used to working at home now. At the start, we thought, you know, coronavirus was making us see how hard it is to work remotely, being in lockdowns. But as a result of this technology adoption boom, whether it's G Suite or Microsoft 365, I'm actually finding it so much more productive to work from home. So I used to think that we were running quite well in the physical space, but then having jumped online and working as a team, I actually know more about with my work colleagues than ever before. Using Microsoft Teams, I'm able to have daily stand-up video chats and essentially be able to ask them about what they're up to, and also also hear from them their personal things, like what are they up to on the weekends or what they're doing that day. And so these daily stand-ups is essentially a way that we've changed our way of working. And I think it was the way of working rather than where we were working that was sort of causing that previous sort of disconnect, I think. And so now it's actually a lot more streamlined and very agile in nature. So we're actually benefiting a lot from working remotely. We're seeing that Zoom and Slack and Atlassian and Dropbox and Adobe, all these services essentially boom. I mentioned before Microsoft's revenues from 365 has increased by 50% year on year. So that's $20 billion out of a total $145 billion in total billed revenue, which is insane. And then in terms of online education, you can see that courses like Coursera and Khan Academy and Udemy are essentially able to sort of benefit from all this additional time that people have at home and wanting to upskill to future-proof themselves. And we're seeing that there's over 450 free online courses from Ivy League schools, from Harvard to Cornell University to Brown and Columbia University and Yale University and Princeton and Penn and Dartmouth. So these are all sort of Ivy League schools that were charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for these uni courses, and now they're all free online. And think about all the ways that you can interact online. We've seen this Japanese classroom essentially celebrate the graduation in Minecraft. So, they're using play and work and learning all in the one platform. And if the kids can do it, we can do it too. Homegrown in Australia is a company called Utopia, and they're essentially a way to generate leads for these university courses because it's able to help you identify what are the things that you're interested in based on these internet videos and the things that they can recommend. So they're a good lead generator for other courses out there. The challenge is to not be distracted by all the different streaming services while you're at home, whether it's watching the TV or watching the movies and cloud streaming the games as well. So while you're at home, I think there's also time to reflect on what it is that you're doing to make sure that you're doing it as most efficiently as possible while doing it remotely. And so tools like automated machine learning, this is an example of data robot, have democratized AI. So people that without a data science background, as long as they have data, structured data in a way that you can train a model, you can now just load this information in and hit the big start button to automatically train a machine learning model to help you make predictions. Microsoft Azure machine learning, and they have automated machine learning as well. AWS from Amazon have SageMaker. Google Cloud has AutoML. So all these different servers like IBM Cloud as well have essentially made access to AI so much more democratized. The other vendors from AutoML is H2O.ai. And there are others where if you just wanted to automate basic tasks like if this then that through your mouse and keyboard and on your monitor, on your computer screen, Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and Blue Prism are examples of these robotic process automations that you can use as tools. And they're very simple to use. They're all drag and drop. And essentially, if you can put together a PowerPoint, then you can put together an automated workflow for you. Whether it's opening emails or checking for the latest forecasts on the weather, or essentially running these intelligent automations to predict your sales figures for the month. Just load in all the previous sales data and then hit start, and it'll give you the predictions using a whole raft of machine learning algorithms, including open source libraries out there. So what is deep learning? If you think about how there's a lot of hype around deep learning and AI right now, it's essentially, it will become just software when the hype is all over, right? They're trying to differentiate from traditional software where it's when you're programming the rules, so the if this then that type of rules. With deep learning software and other machine learning techniques, it's feeding examples and essentially tagging those examples to look out for. And that'll train the model and the learning program. And then if you have a future data that you want to upload, that'll use the model to try to predict those actions. So essentially they're not written, but are trained. And humans can create these AI models by labeling the data, or in deep learning examples, it can try to learn on its own with a sort of a reward function. And that's where you might hear something like a reinforcement learning in the context of, say, trying to automate and learn better, train an AI to play games. And I guess life is the biggest game there is. So the more data that we can feed it in, the more it'll learn as well. So the way these deep learning algorithms work is that if you think about images and facial recognition in that context, all the computer is seeing when it gets an image is a whole bunch of ones and zeros. So those ones and zeros essentially form these abstractions in these neural network architectures. So you can see these are all little neurons in the sort of neural networks. And the first layer of abstraction might come out as edges. So this might be the edge of those, features like faces and other things. It could be an edge of everything. And then the next level of abstraction is these actual facial features, whether it's eyeballs or your nose or your mouth or your ear. These are features on your face that it starts to identify based on these weightings in the neural network. And the third layer might be, faces, actual faces of everyone there is. So it starts to recognize these faces. And number 4 is the full face, that's you. And this is how Facebook might be able to do facial tagging of you if someone uploads a photo of you and suggests if you want to be tagged in that photo or not. And it's based on all the pictures it has of you and how it's trained those individual sort of different abstractions to get to your face. And so this is how broadly deep learning works. And it's been very successful since its advent in 2012, which is when it really became successful, but having the computational power as well as the algorithms developed by this in the history. So in the context of being used in Amazon Go, for example, this is in Seattle, and all it does is you can go into the shop with your Amazon Prime account. So you scan your phone on the when you first enter, and go in and pick up any item on the shelf and just walk out. They call it just walk out shopping. And this is done through a whole raft of deep learning techniques. And obviously it can pick up, the user. When you first scan it, it starts to follow your sort of objects around because there's cameras everywhere in the shop. And it's so learnt that that is you, and it follows you, and it follows what you pick up from the shelf. And even if you put the item back onto the shelf, it'll recognize that as well, so as having not purchased it. So as you walk out, it understands that you walked out and puts all those items and checks out in your cart, and that's where your account is linked to your payments infrastructure, and essentially that puts a debit on your card. And so this is the technology that we're in, and it allows for contactless sort of shopping as well. And this way you don't need anyone else to help you, like the automated checkouts. You don't need to touch the screens to be able to exit as well. And so this is probably the future of the shopping malls as well. But if you think about how deep learning is powering this next generation of computing platforms, it started with conversational computers. We've got these Google Homes and Alexas, and also with self-driving cars. Waymo vehicles have traveled more than 20 million fully autonomous miles, although I think Tesla and another company called Comma AI might be challenging Waymo's dominance in terms of the miles that it's traveled, and also the machine learning techniques and the training models that they've got. If you think about in consumer applications, deep learning is how you differentiate yourself to your competitors. Because, for example, TikTok uses deep learning for their video recommendations, so what a user would like to see. Essentially, it's growing its user base at 10x faster than Snapchat, and that's all through the power of data and AI. And because they're able to create a better user experience for the user base and also recommend better videos, that means that there's more adoption for that platform. So deep learning is actually accelerating at 10 times faster, right? In terms of computational usage, 10 times per year, right? It's 5 times at the rate of Moore's law. So yeah, essentially 10 times per year in computation being used. And the cost to train is also decreasing at an exponential rate. This is a logarithmic graph, and using these new hardware devices like the NVIDIA Volta GPUs or the Google TPUs, these tensor processing units that are custom made for AI development. They're essentially decreasing the cost of training significantly. And so you can see Tesla's autopilot right up there in terms of the training compute time, or the petaflop days that it takes. And since 2010, it's gone from twice every 2 years to 10 times per year. So yeah, on OpenPilot, this is the open sourced model that's essentially powering the comma.ai devices. And because it's open source, anyone can just pick this up. Any car manufacturer can use this and create self-driving vehicles. Now, essentially they're level 2 autonomy. So that means that the driver monitoring exists, and you need to make sure that you're paying attention as you're driving. But OpenPilot does a lot what Tesla's autopilot does, and it does it for free. The way Comma AI makes money is by selling these devices. Essentially, they're retrofitted smartphones with a camera at the back and the cameras at the front for driver monitoring. And all it's doing using the latest machine learning algorithms is says, having seen this picture, what would a human do? What would they go left? Would they go right? Would they brake or go forwards? And so having that sort of reinforcement learning validated as well, combination of that, essentially they're able to train some state-of-the-art models in autonomous driving. And so, yeah, watch out for Comma AI and OpenPilot because, yeah, Tesla definitely has a run for their money as well as Waymo as well. So Tesla's probably the iOS and OpenPilot essentially the Android. If you look at OpenAI, it's a company founded by Elon Musk and Sam Altman here. He was part of the founding members of Y Combinator. Elon Musk stepped out because of that conflict of interest, he thought, and also the strategic direction that OpenAI was going. Initially as a non-profit, but they've since set up a for-profit arm and partnered with Microsoft with these $1 billion in investment. Most of that will go into Microsoft Azure credits in terms of running these machine learning models because of the cost of compute for the deep learning algorithms. And you can see what recently happened was that this model called the GPT-3, the generative pre-trained transformers, essentially. There's many transformers in these deep neural networks. And what it's done is it generates words and code and others based on what it's trained on, simply through natural language. And we'll show you an example in a second, but it's essentially cast a shadow of all the previous different natural language generation models. This is the Turing NLG that Microsoft helped work on. And essentially that is about 10 times as big as in terms of parameters, the degrees of freedom than their predecessors. And look at this is the GPT-2, which is a while ago, but they essentially said that this model only from a couple of years ago was going to be too dangerous to release to the public. And so with GPT-3, this is actually 10 times better. This is an example of how to use GPT-3's API. One of the participants at Y Combinator built this thing called dbuild.co, and it uses the GPT-3 API where it just types in natural language, so a button that says add $3 and a button that says withdraw $5, and it's able to just generate React code, so software development in the user interface, to actually make those buttons work. And it's generated all this code through just learning from all the different code on the code base on GitHub. So this natural language is able to easily allow anyone to rapidly prototype. And I know a lot of the software developers out there are saying that this isn't how you code, but for someone that doesn't usually code, they can actually do these rapid prototyping and make things work. So it's a huge benefit. And what we'll see is that these technologies will be embedded in the coding languages and the sort of tools that are being used, like as part of IntelliCode, for example, and it'll help people automate a lot of the mundane coding exercises through just commenting the natural language of what they want to see. So with all this democratization of the AI, it's still concentrated in these large tech companies in the US. And in China, they've got the 2030 AI strategy, which is essentially becoming the dominant player in AI. So this is going to accelerate over the next 10 years and accelerate even more amid COVID. So they have the Tencent, which is the Facebook that owns WeChat. They have the Huawei's that's challenging iOS, and we're seeing this sort of platform wars and political Cold War 2.0. Banning Huawei and their 5G networks, as well as their smartphones and technologies and their access to chips compared to Apple. And then you've got Google and Baidu in China. They've got the Alibaba to rival the Amazons of the world and the JD.coms as well. And there's also Microsoft for the US. So the difference is that China has a user base of 1.3 billion people, whereas the US has about 300 million. And so the data is actually a lot more enriching for the machine learning algorithms in China. So let's talk about number 3, finally, the unself-isolating in the virtual world. This is transcending your physical self with virtual reality. And so other things, if you think about all the events that have been happening digitally now, and the ones that have been cancelled in the past, like Mobile World Congress and South by Southwest, I'm glad that we can actually run this summit digitally in conjunction with GrowthX. But even CES 2021 has become all digital. And what's challenging is that we need to find ways to make these experiences more immersive, and that's exactly what HTC Vive have done with their Vive ecosystem conference, this virtual Vive ecosystem conference called V Squared EC in 2020, which is in March. It happened then, and everyone essentially used a platform called Engage VR. And Engage VR has now been white labeled into the HTC's Vive XR suite. So it's like the Office 365 or the Microsoft 365 of virtual reality. And people can actually attend these events in virtual reality with their avatars just by uploading a photo and actually moving around in virtual reality using a HTC Vive or an Oculus Quest or a Rift S or any other device that has the Engage VR software. And they're actually having fashion shows like the Paris Fashion Week in October 2020 with a virtual reality summit as well. So we're going to see lots of 3D models, actual models walking down the catwalk, and also with these digital models of the clothing as well to be able to see what that's like. And you'll be able to change out the clothing very quickly, obviously in virtual reality, just like with the click of a button. And there's other sort of virtual reality ecosystems at play now. You know, the virtual reality chat, VR chat, has been a very successful social platform for in VR, whether it's desktop or on your Quest. And Facebook Horizon will be coming out shortly, probably announced at their OC7 event, which is in September. And they're essentially trying to create that movie Ready Player One. If you think about it, if you've seen the ad for it, essentially it's trying to go for that feel where you'll be able to interact with all your Facebook friends in virtual reality on this platform. It's a massive open world as well. And Microsoft have purchased AltSpace VR, which is a similar social platform in VR. And Sansa, the makers behind Sansa made Second Life, and they've pivoted towards sort of these large music events to be able to host more than 100 per instance, and we have that simultaneously run at the same time, and also for corporate events as well. We're also seeing the disruption of art because people can't go to museums properly and appreciate the arts on the wall. So what people have done is actually created these digital arts. And someone has actually created this, someone called Marcomatic. They've created this digital artwork and sold it for $5,000 on this platform called Super Rare. So Super Rare is a tokenized digital art, kind of like CryptoKitties, if you heard of them, on the Ethereum blockchain. And so the owners of these digital artworks will essentially be able to keep and show that they own this artwork in perpetuity until they sell it. And so just like the unique art, you know, it's a lower risk of getting fake art because it has that digital signature embedded on the Ethereum platform. And these are sort of the marketplaces you can purchase these digital assets, whether it's on CG Trader or Turbo Squid or Sketchfab, and this one is on Super Rare. And all purchasing all these digital assets that are made on Unity or Unreal Engine or Crytek, the makers of Crysis. You can also 3D print your objects on something called Thingiverse using MakerBot. And there's going to be a raft of headsets coming out. The Oculus Quest 2 will be coming out shortly, and then there's an updated version of the current Quest, the Quest 1.5 or the Quest Lite, with better visuals and also better processing. They're all adopting this platform called OpenXR, so if developers can just develop on one platform and it'll be able to be played on all the others, with the exception right now of Windows Mixed Reality. And then, yeah, there's so much choice that you have because people eventually, the demand for virtual reality devices has peaked and also exponentially grown a lot since COVID hit, as well as also with the AAA title Half-Life Alyx. That's the sort of best VR game out there right now. And what Valve has done with the index up here has actually sold out and backed up by over 8 weeks in shortages. So yeah, all these players are coming online with the Magic Leap as well. They were suffering for a time and they got a new CEO, so they're back in business and they just raised a round to actually get the Magic Leap 2 out. And Apple will be announcing their Apple Glass at the iPhone 12 event later this year. And they'll be putting that out either in next year as well, the virtual reality device next year or the 2023 sort of timeline. So yeah, and Geo as well. So yeah, this is a sport for choice on devices now, and people are going to essentially the user adoption has increased tenfold. What we're seeing now is also in the future where um, the immersion that you'll have in virtual reality will be indistinguishable from your physical reactions. So this is the Facebook Labs testing facial scanning and be able to translate that into the virtual reality workshop. And you can see this is sort of almost photorealistic in the way that they would generate these pictures. What's challenging is getting users to adopt it, like I was saying before, but you need to find a way to design it for the mainstream and validate the technology. So Magic Leap was mocked for its design because people thought it looked like a spider, and this is sort of is not something you would wear on the street any given day. So Apple will be coming out with a device that you'd want to wear. So this is a concept design of what the Apple Glass might look like. Yeah. So rather than having to want to wear it, you wanted to have something that you want to wear it rather than to need to wear it for work, right? And so this is a Tesla suit, the full body haptic suit. So they use the TENS stimulation, the muscle stimulation to have these haptic feedback systems. They do monitoring, motion capturing and avatar systems. They do climate control systems of replicating heat and coldness in VR, and also a biometric system to make sure your vitals are good in VR. They've also come out with a Tesla glove as well. But what we're seeing is that telemedicine is able to be delivered through the abundance of these devices. So being able to measure yourself, whether it's sort of your heart rate or these thermometers and the pressure and the sort of various scans that you can do at home rather than having to go to a GP, it makes it a lot more sort of safer and also more convenient. And we're seeing telemedicine being adopted at a rapid pace as a result as well. The risk of waiting in that sort of waiting room among other sick patients is not something people want to experience. So we're also simulating taste. So if you want to go to try out new food, this is a company that's developing an arbitrary taste generator. So saltiness or acidicness or bitterness or umami and sweetness all combined to try to mimic what it would taste, say, for a burger. And we're seeing probably in the future of celebrity chefs or these master chefs essentially developing signature taste buds and be able to pass that on to their users. We're also seeing synthetic speech being generated from the brain recording. So eventually you'll be able to just connect your brain to the cloud. And that's what Neuralink is essentially looking to do with the inputs and outputs. And we're going to live in sort of this world of the matrix, if you think about it. This is where we're going to head. And people, there will be people that prefer the matrix than reality, because there's a cipher saying ignorance is bliss. I love the taste of the steak, even though I know it's in virtual reality or in the matrix, it still tastes so good. So there's definitely going to be people staying indoors because they prefer the experiences of virtual reality. And so all these sort of concepts go around thinking about transhumanism, because transhumanism is about how do we use science and technology to transcend these limitations that we have as physical, biological beings. And whether it's to increase our intelligence through merging with AI, to then looking at our well-being by lifting us up through the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and also extending our healthy human lifespan with science and technology. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening, and I hope to answer any of the questions that you might have as well.